Good evening. This is Pastor Barbara, aka Preacher with Parrots. Today is the 20th of November of 2016. It's a Sunday night, so we're studying the New Testament. And because we're studying the Gospels, and 2, 3, sometimes 4 of the Gospels all teach on the same subject, instead of studying first Matthew and then Mark and then Luke and then John, we are studying them as a group. It's called now chronology. It used to be called harmony of the Gospels years ago when I first entered the ministry in my early 20s and the early 50s. This is Jesus' first rejection at Nazareth. I had started to teach without putting the recorder on. And I was telling about the fact that when I was in, right after the Six-Day War, probably about 3 weeks after the war ended, I was in Nazareth and the lights were out like they are here on the mountain. Actually, it's a weekend, so we don't have, this is a touristy town. And a lot of celebrities have their second house here, but they're all gone. I'm looking outside and I see probably 24 houses with lights on, but I'm sure there are more. I was in Nazareth and I was looking across the Sea of Galilee. Not directly across, but kind of over to one side. And I commented, I said, that looks like a city over there from the lights. And somebody said, yeah, that's Cana. Well, let me read to you what we have here. But we have previously read, Jesus could not do miracles where they knew him real well. That seems like almost different from televangelists, right? The more we know about them, the more good things they do that we hear about, the more we think, oh, wow, if I could go to one of their meetings, maybe I would be healed. But with Jesus, there was another thing at play here. The more they knew him, the more familiar he was with them. And so, thank you. Commenting here on one of my live audience. We're having problems with the network, so all kinds of things are happening over here that I just suddenly have no control over and decided I didn't want to try to fix before I got started. People knew Jesus real well and they failed to see who he was. Maybe if we knew some of these televangelists really well, we would perhaps respect them more, or maybe respect them less. But to the people of Nazareth, Jesus was the kid down the street. I'm putting my autobiography on the network. And I'm getting ready to do a video called Remembering the Old Time Religion in Royal Oak, because I used to sing on a program called The Old Time Religion. I guarantee right now when I put it up, unless I specifically send it to people who would know various churches, because it was people from a lot of churches were on this. It was a Sunday night program after church, like about 9 o'clock at night, after everybody went to their own church, got out of their own church, went to this program that happened to be in the chapel of a funeral parlor. Well, somebody recorded me with a 78 disc. You wouldn't believe until you see it. And things went on in that. They're very, very different. And I want to do a little thing, and it'll be called Remembering the Old Time Religion, which is the name of the program. But I guarantee you go where I grew up, and they'd say, yeah, I guess I went to school with her. You're kidding. She writes books, teaches in colleges, teaches the Bible on the internet. You're kidding, right? You're kidding. Because what's familiar to you is not special. Just a kid down the street you played jacks with, or jump rope, or whatever they did when you were a kid growing up. And because they saw the humanity of Jesus, they failed to see his divinity. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, as his custom was. Rosa and I traveled for about 8 years before we, quote unquote, settled down and I started teaching in one of our Bible colleges. So we visited at least every 2 years my parents' home and her mother's home. And it was Jesus' custom to go home every once in a while also. He went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. You know, there's one temple. You know that I'm a member of the Temple Institute. And by the way, my video on the fact that Rabbi Kahane is not, because he didn't accept the Sanhedrin making him the high priest. I wondered, why is this video? It already happened a couple of months ago. Why are people still looking at this video? And it's because the matter, I guess, is not settled. But there's one temple. There hasn't been a temple since 70 AD when Rome destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Been almost 2,000 years without a temple. But when there was a temple, there was one temple in the world, one. But it's a big world. A lot of Jews around the world. One temple. The Mormons have more than one temple. I can remember when they just had the one in Salt Lake City. So, synagogue was a place where adult Jews, if there were 10 male adult men that had been bar mitzvah, that's roughly 12 years old or older, plus younger and older and women and kids and whatever, but 10 adult men, you could have a synagogue. And you had a rabbi, and they had scrolls, like I have books. And they had scrolls, and they would invite somebody to come and be on their guest list, and they would give them the scroll, and then the person who came to read in the synagogue, they would invite him to read and talk about what he read. So Jesus would basically do in the synagogue, and others did also. They would basically do in the synagogue what I'm doing here. I read a little bit and explain it. You remember the time that Jesus was in the synagogue And he read a prophecy about himself. And he said, today, this prophecy has been fulfilled in your presence. And they're, what? But he had read something about Messiah. So Jesus is in the synagogue. He has been invited to read from, called it the law and the prophets, from the Old Testament, especially the Torah, the books of Moses. He went, as was his custom, to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the prophet Isaiah. It's Isaias here, because you realize that this is the New Testament. Most of it's written in Greek, but some of it's written in Aramaic. So sometimes we get, especially in the name of a city or the name of a person, we get a similar name, but this is Isaias, it's Isaiah. And when he opened the book, and I'm about to read what I had just said a moment ago. And when he opened the book, he found the place where it was written, and it said this: the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. Now, that's not necessarily people without money. You can be poor in education. You can be poor in clothing. You can be poor in many ways. But he has, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted. He's reading out of the book, out of the scroll. To preach deliverance to the captain. Deliverance is what you need when you can't quit doing something. Got a habit you can't break. Got a sickness you can't get over. And the recovery of sight to the blind. To set at freedom, or to give liberty, those that are bruised or damaged. To preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book. And he gave it again to the minister, and he sat down. And the synagogue was fastened on him. Wow. Did you hear that? And he began to say unto them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. I'm the one anointed to preach the gospel to those who need it. I'm the one to bring deliverance to those that need it. I'm the one to bring healing to the sick. And they fastened on him. And all bare witness and wondered at the gracious words that proceeded out of his mouth. Wow. And they said, isn't this Joe's kid? Is not this Joseph's son? They didn't know about virgin birth. They knew Mary was his mother. Mary and Joseph lived in this house. Must be Joseph's kid. And he said unto them, you will surely say unto me this proverb. This is a proverb. Physician, heal thyself. You should hear me talk to my physician. I had one I didn't like. He thought he was somebody. And I didn't think he was all that. And I said, you want me to be impressed by your doctorate? Be impressed by mine. Maybe you went to school and learned something. I went to a different school and learned something else. But you're not the only smart person in the room. Anyway, he said, physician, heal thyself. Whatsoever we've done in Capernaum, do also in your own country. How is it that I'm thinking of one country that was under a dictatorship while I was there. Now, I didn't preach from the pulpit, I preached from the piano. How is it I was not that great a person in my own neighborhood? I'm just somebody's neighbor. I'm not that preacher from another country. And he said, verily I say unto you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. Because it's just you. You grew up here. You broke your arm here. You got mad and socked somebody and gave him a black eye here. All of your imperfections are known here. You're not somebody that came in and sang a beautiful song and left. Here you're just one of us. But I tell you of a truth, many widows here in Israel in these days of Elias, which is Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a famine throughout the land, but unto none of them was Elijah sent except to Sarepta. A lot of widows, a lot of women that didn't have a man working with a job to feed them adequately. That's why in this particular time of history, we had men who had many wives. You didn't have a wife with many husbands, but this was a man's world. Only men could work. And many of them married women because the woman had no one else to take care of them. So they married them and let them come in their house and live. And he said there were a lot of widows, but there was one in particular that Elijah was sent to. And she said, I have just enough food. Now, I'm not reading scripture right now. I'm telling you the story. Elijah went to her and asked her, cook me a lunch. She said, well, I was going to, except I really don't have much. I was going to cook. I have a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil, and I was going to make a little bit of bread. And my boy and I were going to eat our last meal and then wait for death to come. But Elijah said, would you feed me first? She said, okay. I mean, if I die today, I die tomorrow. A day after tomorrow, I'm going to die. She said, sure. A lot of widows. Elijah got sent just to one. Elijah said, feed me first. She made the bread, gave it to Elijah. The oil that she made the biscuits with and the flour, she used all the oil to make the biscuits. But she went back the next morning and the oil was still there. Now she used it, but now there was still oil there. And she used the last bit of flour to feed Elijah the prophet. Well, why should the prophet get fed if the widow can't get fed? I mean, I can just see that going through somebody's mind. But the flour never disappeared. Each day she cooked and used it all. And the next morning there was more. How come one widow in all of Israel gets blessed by having Elijah as their house guest? And many lepers were in Israel at the time that Elias the prophet was there. And none of them were cleansed except the Syrian by the name of Naaman. And they in the synagogue, they heard these things and they said, wow, never thought about it that way. Some of them were filled with wrath. Who's he? Come in here and talk to us this way. And they rose up and they threw him out of the city. And they led him to the brow of the hill where their city was built. And they intended to throw him off the hill. But he, passing through the midst of them, went his way. Strange. But that's what happened. That's Luke's account of what happened when he went to the synagogue and read. Now, that's what Luke says. Let's look at Matthew. Matthew says, and leaving Nazareth, he came and he dwelt in Capernaum, which is by the seacoast, by the borders of Zebulun and Nephthalim, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Nephthalim, by the way of the sea, Sea of Galilee, beyond Jordan, the Jordan River, empties. Jordan is mountainous, like where I live. We have snow in the winter, and in the spring the snow melts, so our rivers are full, and our lake is full in the spring. But then as the year gets toward autumn, our rivers are not, and our lake is not that full. But he's at the Sea of Galilee. The people that sat in darkness. Now, this doesn't give us the whole story of him reading and what he read and what he said and where he lived. It omits all that. The people that sat in darkness saw a great light, and to them that sat in the region, the shadow of death light is sprung up. Now, this next that I'm going to read is a continuation of what Matthew writes. And Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee, I want to check the time. Yeah. Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee saw Simon and Peter and Andrew his brother. They were casting their net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said unto them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And straightway they left their nets and they followed him. No back talk, no none of this, none of the other. Straightway they followed him. And going on from thence, he saw two brethren, James and John, in a ship, with Zebedee their father, mending the nets. They were fishermen, but it's amazing how little time you actually spend, if you're a fisherman, fishing. You've got to have a boat. You've got to keep your boat up. Got to take care of it. Got to have nets. Nets break every day. If you've got a lot of fish, you got nets that are broken. They got to be mended every day. And he called them. And they immediately left the ship and their father, and they followed him. Let's see what Mark says. Mark 1:16. Now as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And Jesus said unto them, Come ye after me, and I will make you fishers of men. Instead of doing a bunch of work and casting out your net and bringing it in and taking out the fish, taking the fish down to the market, eating some and selling some, he said, Come after me and I will make you fishers of men. And straightway, no conversation, no discourse, no, well, let me talk it over, let me go say bye to somebody. They followed him. And then when he'd gone a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. They were also in the ship, mending their nets. See, awful lot to do besides just fishing. Fishing is fun. When it's just you and one line and a worm on it, or a fake worm, and you're just sitting there hoping to get enough to eat that night. And straightway he called them, and he left their father Zebedee in the ship, and went ship with the hired servants. Now these were not poor guys. They had a business. There were two of them. They had boats. They had nets. They had a hired guy. And they had their dad with them. He said, Follow me. They did. Now we go to Luke. We were in Luke when he was in the temple, and he read, and he said, Today this is fulfilled. As the people pressed upon him to hear the word of the Lord, he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, another name for the Sea of Galilee. And by the way, it's not a sea, it's a lake. I was started to tell you about in the mountains, our snow turns into water at a high altitude. As it comes down lower, a lot of snow is melting in the spring, and you have a lot of water. It comes from Jordan and Syria. The Jordan River comes from melted snow. And in the spring, there's a lot of it. And it goes into the Sea of Galilee. And then at the south part of the lake, Sea of Galilee, you don't see the lake anymore. You see the river again. So if you see it on a map, you see something that comes down like this, and then you see the lake. And then down here, you just see the little river again. He saw two ships standing by the lake. Fishermen were gone. They were taking care of their nets. One belonged to Simon, and prayed him he would thrust out a little from the land. He said, I want to get in your boat. but I want to back off from shore a little bit. And he taught the people out of the ship. I learned something in Greece that I didn't know. There's this big thing in the capital of Greece, and it's not far from the water. And the Acropolis, huge groups of people would go. They would put on plays, they would do things. They tried things and then tried other things until they found something that worked. But they found a way that they could use the wind like a loudspeaker system. The wind comes over the water, and as it does, it picks up juice, it picks up speed, picks up sound. And then wherever the wind goes, it takes that sound with them. I remember the first PA system we had. Some Puerto Ricans in Gary, Indiana, gave us $54 to buy this sound system. It was a big, big box. At the top of the box was a speaker. At the bottom, you placed the amplifier in it. And then it had a bag, like an envelope in it, and the cord and the microphone were in that. We carried that for years, had that system. But they learned long before a sound system that you could make the wind carry sound. Said, and he entered into one of the ships, but he's in a boat in the water and the people are on the shore, and he's preaching. And when he got through speaking, he said to Peter, Simon Peter, launch into the deep and let your nets down. Now, they were obedient when he said, take your boat out, I want to use your boat. And Simon said, Master, we fished all night. We got nothing. Zero. Nevertheless, because you said so, I will let down the net. And when they had done this, they enclosed a great multitude of fish, and the net broke. And they beckoned to their partners, all the other fishermen, come on, the net's broken. We got a net here loaded with fish, and now the net is broke, which were in the other ship, that they would come and help them. And they came, and they filled the ship so that they began to sink. Wouldn't you love to get a load of fish like that? When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees. Depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. The more you see the real power of Jesus, the more you realize you're nobody. You might think you're somebody, until you become aware of who Jesus is. When you compare yourself to other people, especially some people, you look pretty good. But when you see the power of Jesus working, you realize you're nobody. And I lost, I thought I lost my place, but I actually looked at the wrong column. And they were amazed. Wait a minute. They were astonished, and all that were with him, at the draught of fishes that was taken. And so was James and John, the sons of Zebedee, that were partners with Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon Peter, fear not, from henceforth you shall catch men. You throw out a net and bring in so many fish that your boat is sinking. You haven't seen anything yet, Jesus said. Hang out with me, and you'll catch men. You'll be fishers of men. And when they brought their ships to land, they forsook all and followed him. When you see the actual power of Jesus, when you see it with your own eyes, ships sinking, after you have just fished all night and got nothing, and Jesus said, drop your net down, and they do, and the boats are sinking because they're too loaded with fish. I'm going to read about 3 verses because they're very short, and I don't want to get into a long something that's going to take us past our regular closing time. We're in Capernaum now. And on the Sabbath, guess what Jesus did on the Sabbath? What does every good Jew do on the Sabbath? Well, they weren't in Jerusalem, so they didn't go to the temple. So they went to the synagogue. Mark 1. They went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine. You ever listen to 2 people talk on the same subject? And one read and explained, and another one you go, wow, I read that. I never realized that before. He taught as one that had authority, not as the scribes. The scribes, the Pharisees, the Essenes, these were all religious groups like the Baptists, Holiness, the Pentecostals. The scribes weren't all that smart, but they were teachers. But Jesus had authority. When he read and he explained, y'all said, wow, heard that before, but never realized that before. Luke says, and came down to Capernaum in the city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath day. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for his word was with power. Could listen to him all day. I think I can take one more subject because we're going rather quickly. I mean, I'm reading 2 or 3 verses from the different gospels that are saying the same thing. We now have a man with an unclean spirit. We have Mark and we have Luke that write about it. Mark says, and there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. Now, we got a couple of possibilities here. This can be a mental illness, person that doesn't know what they're doing, or it can be a person who is possessed of an evil spirit, and they aren't doing anything, but the evil spirit within them is doing something. But in the synagogue, I mean, it's hard sometimes to look at somebody and know exactly what's wrong with them. Dr. Phil is pretty good. Because sometimes 2 people can be doing the same thing, but for different reasons. And he cried out, and this is what he screamed out to the people. Let us alone. What do we got to do with you? You, Jesus of Nazareth? You come to destroy us? I know you. You're the Holy One of God. Ooh. At first, we would say this man is not all there. But then he says, I know who you are. You're the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him. Because Jesus knew what the problem was. It was not him. It was what was in him. If you're dealing, and this is why it's difficult when a person is a young minister without a lot of experience. Unless you have experience or a word from God, how do you know whether the person has a mental illness or whether they've had too much to drink, or how do you know? And Jesus said, stop. Be quiet. He rebuked him. Hold your peace. And then he said, come out of him. Who's Jesus talking to? Jesus is talking to the evil spirit in him. Jesus recognizes this is not a bad person. This is a person that has a spirit in them, and the spirits, you know, you've heard people say he had too much to drink last night, or that's the booze talking. But when the unclean spirit had come out of him with a loud voice, see, an unclean spirit has authority. Tom, Dick, and Harry can say, come out of him, come out of him, come out of him. Nothing happens. But if the person telling them to come out, commanding them to come out, has spiritual authority over them, as Jesus had over them, they cried with a loud voice and came out. And they were all amazed, in so much as they questioned, and they said, what's this? What kind of new doctrine is this? And with what authority that even the unclean spirits obey him. Have you ever seen anybody try to act like a preacher and they're not? You ever seen anybody line up the dog and the cat and the pets and the dolls and the teddy bears and teach them or preach or sing or do whatever? And his fame spread throughout the region of Galilee. We're still up there in that part of Nazareth, Sea of Galilee, that area. Luke says, and we have just a couple verses here and I'll end with this. Same thing, but Luke's telling about it now. And in the synagogue there was a man that had the spirit of an unclean devil. What is a devil? A devil is an angel that was kicked out of heaven. Lucifer, long before the Garden of Eden, looked at Jesus receiving a lot of credit and glory and praise, and he thought, whew, I'd like people to treat me that way. I'd love to be worshipped. And he started a rebellion. And he had a bunch of angels that went along with him. And they were kicked out of heaven. That's the unclean spirit. And the unclean spirit in the man said, let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Yeah, they knew who he was. They once lived in heaven as angels until they joined forces with Lucifer, Satan, and got kicked out of heaven. So they knew who he was. The man cried with a loud voice. The spirit in him said, let us alone. What have we to do with you? And that spirit in them, we've been through this before. Angels don't get married. Angels don't have babies. All the angels that were created are still around. 2/3 of them are in heaven serving Jesus. 1/3 of them are down here. We call them demons. They know exactly who Jesus is. They don't have to read a book or listen to a sermon. They know exactly who Jesus is. They said, let us alone. What have we got to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? You come to destroy us? No, we came to stop them. I know thee, who thou art. You are the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him. Hold your peace and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, sometimes there's a big physical reaction. These spirits do not want to be without a body. Now, this is not a ghost story. It's a fact. Spirits do not have bodies, and they don't want to be without a body. And they were all amazed, and they said, what a word is this? For with authority and power, he commands unclean spirits, and they come out. And the fame of him went out to every place in the country around about. And I need a pen. Let me get one here.